This guy is picking up all kinds of followers for his new podcast, which he does. A daily podcast. The Sage, the sexy beast from San Francisco. How about it for John Rothman? Rothman, you've joined the podcast crew, huh?
I have. For those who want to listen, it's Around the Political World with John Rothman, Monday through Friday, never more than 10 minutes. It's a quick shot, and I'm enjoying it immensely, and the response has been overwhelming. And I want to thank Mark Thompson and the crew, because you guys have been very helpful, very supportive, and we've used some of our segments, I understand, and now being posted. So thanks very much, Mark.
Of course, we are connected to you. We share
Can
a lot
I
of
make
the...
one comment quickly
Please.
about what's happening now at the floor of the ocean? Those of you who are old San Franciscans will remember Playland at the beach, and you will remember an attraction called the Diving Bell. Now, you can Google it, Mark. It's very short, and you can even play it. The Diving Bell, and it shows the descent. Once all the kids got in, it went down, and you thought you were under the ocean, and really you were submerged, and then it popped to the top, and it was an amazing sensation. But I can tell you the Diving Bell, I don't think is remembered by many, but it was very much like the experience that they must be feeling. It was very...
Have you found it, Kim or Albert? Can you find the Diving Bell, the thing that to which Mr. Rothman is referring?
I just Googled it. It was right there. The Diving Bell Playland at the beach. And it's about a 1-minute clip of the kids getting in, and they had an adult there too. The door closing, it's sinking and then bobbing to the surface. And it's very
Google
dramatic.
it.
Well, find it, enjoy it, and it will. Sadly, I think Albert's found it. Of course, Albert does great work.
Can we take a
Go
second
ahead,
just to
Albert.
watch that? There it is.
Yeah, Albert.
Albert, thank you.
Yeah.
See, they're all
people getting
going
on.
in.
Mm-hmm.
They're all going in, and you'll see the last person in.
Look how the ladies are dressed up. Everybody dressed up back then.
Can I watch?
Look at the guy who's closing them in.
Right. They send in an adult. Now watch as it descends.
Here it is.
There's never been anything like this.
Descending bell into the water. Now completely covered by the...
You're really
waters of San
fully
Francisco
submerged,
Bay.
and you can see
That's
fish
not fake.
swimming around.
That's
and there it comes
real.
up.
Oh, and then it does pop up. Yes, very impressive. Rothman with a... And that was at Playland. What did that cost? Do you remember? A nickel, a quarter?
It was nothing. I mean, it was ridiculous. But I can tell you, I do recall once when it got stuck, and everyone was laughing, and of course, then it popped up. But had it stayed on the bottom, it would have been something. But it's interesting, Mark, because I can still remember. I can still remember the feeling of claustrophobia.
Oh yeah. Oh, yeah. I don't know how these people are doing this. As I said, I can't even do an MRI. It is true. Phineas, I agree with this. The guy who is on board with them looks like Barney Fife in that shot. He has the, Andy, I'm going to go down with the... all right, let's run for Brother Rothman. A little bit of the Brett Baer back and forth related to Trump and personnel within the Trump administration. Then I want to get your reactions specifically to a question about this. Go ahead, Albert. Thank you very much.
In 2016, you said that. I'm going to surround myself with only the best and most serious people.
Well, I did do that.
This
and we
time-
had tremendous. Look, we had the best economy we've ever had.
This
The world
time-
has ever seen.
Your Vice President, Mike Pence, is running against you.
Yeah.
Your Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, she's running against you. Your former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, said he's not supporting you. You mentioned National Security Advisor John Bolton. He's not supporting you either. You mentioned Attorney General Bill Barr, says you shouldn't be president again. Calls you the consummate narcissist and troubled man. You recently called and Barr a gutless pig. Your second defense secretary is not supporting you, called you irresponsible. This week, you and your White House called your White House Chief of Staff, John Kelly, weak and ineffective and born with a very small brain. You called your acting White House Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney, a born loser. You called your first Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, dumb as a rock, and your first Defense Secretary, James Mattis, the world's most overrated general. You called your White House Press Secretary, Kayleigh Canadian, milquetoast, and multiple times you've referred to your Transportation Secretary, Elaine Chao, as Mitch McConnell's China-loving wife. So Why did you hire all of them in the first place?
Because I hired 10 to 1 that were fantastic. We had a great economy. We had phenomenal people in charge of the economy. We had phenomenal people in the military. I'm not a fan of Milley, and I'm not a fan of certain of the television people, but I knocked out ISIS. I defeated ISIS. They said, Mattis, it would take 3 years, and I don't think we can do it. I did it in a period of like 4 weeks.
There's a lot of people who praise you for your policies. I just said that.
That's true. Well, I mean, you just went through a list. But don't forget, for everyone you say, I had 10 that love us. And one thing
Okay,
happens,
that's
I find with
I first of all, sorry about the audio being a little low, but the interview with Bret Baier was, I think, damaging by any objective sort of evaluation. But John, you know that the true Trumpies view everything he says as truthful, and they rally around. It's a true cult of personality. I wonder if you could speak to the broader electorate and whether or not exchanges like this and the way that the early campaigning is going, with Christie attacking him and with slowly the kind of support that he's enjoyed beginning to erode, whether that will have any effect at all in how you handicap this entire thing, exchanges like that one, and how the campaign is going.
First of all, I watched Bret Baier's interview over 2 nights. It was excellent. He really did a good job. And this exposes Donald Trump. Here's the key. He can never be wrong. He can never be wrong. He can never make a mistake. And that is the vulnerability of any politician, because anytime you think you're right all the time, believe me, you're in trouble. But will it affect Republican voters? The latest polls, and I've seen the CNN poll this morning, shows a slight drop, but a very slight drop. Remember, and this is the key, the struggle is to win the nomination. Once you win the nomination, you're on the ballot for the November election. Today, Donald Trump absolutely defeats any potential Republican challenger. He dropped, I think, 5 points. It's nothing. He's still going to have a 30% base. And the 2 areas where we have to look very carefully will be Iowa and New Hampshire. And if he wins in Iowa and New Hampshire, he will be the Republican nominee for president of the United States. So, Mark, don't ask for a rational response. It is the Trump syndrome. And I'm going to be talking about that on my own podcast, but I can tell you that it is a syndrome that is profoundly disturbing.
The reality of this campaign is on all sides, I think, related oftentimes, and the GOP has made such effective political hay through the years with this, cultural wedge issues. One that was foisted upon them, but it's their own doing, is the extreme position the Supreme Court took and has allowed this overturning of Roe, so women's reproductive freedoms are no longer guaranteed in this country.
May I just say to you, you're absolutely right. This is a 1-year anniversary of the overthrow of Roe, and the argument that is being made is fascinating. And you're hearing the Republicans saying this repeatedly. It should be returned to the states. Well, let me just pose this question. If after Brown versus the Board of Education, the Republicans or anyone had cried it should be returned to the states, let the states decide, you know that the country, at least the South, would have remained heavily segregated. The simple truth is there has to be a standard. And the Republicans have now really put themselves in a real bind. They are losing votes. They are losing votes deservedly. And I believe, and people can think I'm crazy, but I think I'm right, the lesson of Wisconsin rings true. In Wisconsin, a conservative former Supreme Court justice ran against another jurist, and the jurist who ran as a Republican, basically, advocating for the overthrow of Roe v. Wade, was defeated overwhelmingly in Wisconsin. Why is that critical? Because Wisconsin is a bellwether state. I know we're going to talk about the transgender ruling. That also is going to be critical. And I listen, by the way, very carefully to Fox. Please notice I don't call it news. That would be an oxymoron. But I do listen to Fox to hear where they're going with this. And I do not think it is a wedge issue, which is a winning issue. The issue that will dominate in terms of social issues is the question of a woman's right to choose. Please note, I did not say abortion. I said a woman's right to choose. And women across this country, whether they're for or against, believe they should have the right to control their own bodies.
Right. Arkansas, the decision by the federal judge there that you're referring to was involving trans care, trans freedoms, essentially freedoms to use puberty blockers, for example, and even trans surgeries for minors. This is controversial, John, and it's by no means clear that this is a right-left issue. I think there are people on the left who have an issue with this situation involving minors. That is to say, minors seeking puberty blockers and surgery, and then
right.
there are people, and so it's a mix. Okay, this is not left-right. This is a major ruling, though, by this federal judge in Arkansas, which is not exactly a lefty state.
No, you're absolutely right. It's going to be an issue. But I do believe that the transgender issue will not transcend the question of a woman's right to choose. I think that is going to be the critical issue. But there are a lot of social issues which could be raised. Look, we all know now that the question of playing on sports teams, when you talk about transgender, is a major issue in a lot of communities. But I have to tell you, Mark, and I really believe this, in the end, the American people will not vote for an extreme position. I think that's absolutely true.
The podcast is Around the Political World with John Rothman. It's daily. And look at you. Every day you kick it out. How does that go, John? You do it first thing in the morning?
Yes, I get up about 7 o'clock in the morning to do the recording. It's posted by 9 o'clock, sometimes a little earlier. I have a producer, Go-Go Zoger, who's doing just a great job. And it's received a phenomenal response. My understanding is that we have thousands of listeners now. And I must say, again, that those of you who listen to the Mark Thompson program, feel free to tune into what I'm doing. It's a wonderful thing. And I will always continue, Mark, to join you on Wednesdays, at least.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Listen to that. Wow. That is his pledge. Going forward, we want to be able to support you any way we can. John, we appreciate your contributions and your take. And as I've told you before, I'm exploiting you because the audience loves you, and now they have a place to find you. So as the field of the GOP begins to, you've sort of just reviewed it for all of us that regardless of what happens, regardless of how many Brett Baer interviews get rolled out, and regardless of how many wedge issues and regardless essentially of how much incoming fire Donald Trump takes, he will likely be the GOP nominee. And then you feel it's likely he'll lose the general because of a lot of these independent voters who may gravitate toward issues like Roe that they have seen his Supreme Court rule on. What happens if Joe Biden doesn't make it to the general?
All right, back up for 1 second. We're doing a snapshot in time. That is to say, what would happen today? Trump would be the nominee. We're going to see an indictment coming from the federal government on January 6th. We are going to see the indictment coming out of Georgia. We are going to see continued questions, including the August 14th deadline, which we are now told is at least a preliminary date for the trial that will take place. I don't think it'll take place on the 14th. But the point is, there are a whole series of things happening all the way up that are absolutely remarkable. So Donald Trump does not have a clear shot. What you said earlier applies, and that is he has a core group of followers who are going to follow him to the ends of the earth. Remember what he said. He could shoot somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue, and he would still hold those voters. Now, you ask about Joe Biden. There was a major development today when Joe Biden last night at a fundraiser talked about the Chinese leadership, the president of China, as a dictator. And of course, it caused waves because Anthony Blinken had just met, our Secretary of State, had just met with the Chinese president. Look, you have to be careful what you say in terms of diplomacy. And it's very clear that Joe Biden has a contest. Let me just explain what that means. Anything could happen to Joe Biden, health-wise, politically, whatever it may be. The Hunter Biden case, which we haven't even touched on yet, is a major issue for the Republicans. It is not a major issue for the Democrats at this point. And remember that all the accusations which you heard on Fox that Joe Biden was the beneficiary of a $5 million bribe. I want to say that again, a $5 million bribe. Yet there is no evidence. There is no compelling evidence. There is nothing that has been turned up by the Republicans in the House who are doing the investigation. Let me be crystal clear. Anything can happen politically. But at this moment, the Republican Party is stuck because they can't desert Donald Trump because they're afraid they'll lose his supporters, and they can't embrace him because he's got that problem. And Joe Biden, if the Democrats should find an open field, first, let's talk about the fact that Kamala Harris is the successor. She's the vice president, and no matter what people may say about her, she would become president of the United States of America. What happens if there is a real contest for the Democratic nomination? Well, Bobby Kennedy Jr. is now polling at 20%. Bobby Kennedy Jr., I have to tell you, and I've interviewed him, and I think you've interviewed him as well, is frankly not fit to be president of the United States. He belongs to the anti-vax movement, and his comments about China and Russia are absolutely ridiculous. But the fact that he has that much traction based on his name is very interesting. And let me also say a word about Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom has declared he is going to vote for Joe Biden, but Gavin Newsom is not a candidate at this point. But if something happens, might he run? I don't think he'd run against Kamala Harris, but I think it's one of the things we have to talk about in terms of a fluid system. Let me make one other quick comment, Mark. I know we're running out of time. If this were 1967, I could not have predicted Eugene McCarthy running for the presidency. I could not have predicted Bobby Kennedy jumping in and being assassinated. I could not have predicted Martin Luther King being assassinated. I could not have predicted, even though I worked for him, Richard Nixon actually winning the election. So one of the things we learned from our history is that it's fluid. It's completely fluid. And
John, McCarthy, who you mentioned, he ran third party?
No, not in 1968. He contested for the Democratic nomination for president and actually came close, very close, to defeating Lyndon Johnson in
And
New
he
Hampshire.
didn't then default to a third-party run?
No, he did not.
Okay.
He ran as a third-party candidate.
Who were the third-party candidates back when third-party? You had
George Wallace.
George
Wallace,
the
American Independent Party. George Wallace, American Independent Party, ran in 1968 and carried 5 states in the South. It was
didn't John Anderson or somebody like that run third party?
1980. John Anderson, who was a Republican, who had sought the Republican nomination for the presidency in 1980. You may recall he scored big when in New Hampshire he came out in favor of gun control. And that's when everything came together for him. Then he ran as a third-party candidate for president, and he took a Democrat, former governor of Wisconsin, Pat Lucey, as his running mate, but he scored no electoral votes at all.
Well, third parties in this country, if we're not set up for it. We're set up in a two-party system. You can get in as a third-party candidate, but you can't win as a third-party candidate, so you can really only act as a spoiler.
Trivia question for you, Mark. Who was the last third-party candidate to be elected president of the United States?
Oh, I have no idea. What is he?
Abraham Lincoln, 1860.
Is that right? He was third party?
The
Wow.
Republican Party was a
Abraham Lincoln
party.
right behind me here.
Oh, there he is, yeah.
Thank you. The likeness of...
all I can tell you is and in those days, the Democrats split in 3. There was a Southern Democratic Party, was the National Democratic Party, and there was a third party called the Unionists. And so Lincoln crept in because of that.
We should get back to dividing the country up like that, don't you think, John?
No. You know, you would have been a Confederate for sure, Mark Thompson.
No, I promise you that's not true. I'd be a rebel of some kind, but I would not be a Confederate. We love you, John Rothman. Congratulations on the podcast. We'll keep mentioning it and feeding all the listeners we can over there around the world with John Rothman. And we appreciate your take on things on Wednesdays. Bye, John Rothman.
See you next week. Thank you.
Yeah, look forward to it. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.